The room was filled with laughter and chatter, the kind of lively atmosphere that made everyone feel both excited and slightly nervous. People were dressed in fine clothes, with sparkling jewelry and shiny shoes, and the air smelled faintly of perfume and freshly polished wood. The young woman walked in quietly, not because she wanted to hide, but because she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. She had been invited to this fancy gathering as a guest, and while she knew a few people there, most were strangers. This was a world she didn't usually step into, a world of sophistication and elegance, a world where every movement seemed measured and deliberate. She had never considered herself someone extraordinary, at least not in the way the people in this room seemed to be. Yet here she was, holding herself with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Someone had jokingly suggested she play the piano, and she had laughed along. After all, she had played before, but never in front of such an audience and never seriously. It was supposed to be lighthearted, a small joke to amuse her friends. But as she glanced around, she realized that most people were curious to see her, some with polite smiles, others with an expectant glint in their eyes. The piano, a grand and glossy instrument, stood in the corner, catching the light in a way that made it look almost magical. Her hands itched to touch the keys, but she reminded herself that this was supposed to be just a joke. The first few steps toward the piano felt heavier than they should. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, but she tried to push the nervousness aside. She reminded herself that it was all for fun, that no one expected a serious performance. Some of the guests were leaning in slightly, curious, but mostly trying to hide it behind polite smiles. It was strange, she thought, how people could feel so much expectation without saying a word. She sat down on the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys, and took a slow breath. The moment felt surreal, almost like stepping into another world where her usual rules did not apply. At first, she pressed a few notes randomly, simple and playful, just to get a sense of the keys beneath her fingers. The sounds were light and airy, not complicated at all. A few people chuckled, thinking this was the joke they had been promised. She smiled, letting the laughter fill the space around her. There was something freeing in knowing she didn't have to be perfect, that the pressure of expectations was almost non-existent. She felt a little mischievous, as if she was letting the world see her playful side, a side that rarely showed itself. As the minutes passed, she started to relax, moving her fingers more confidently across the piano. Her hands seemed to remember patterns she had long forgotten, simple melodies that made her smile. The guests continued to watch, some whispering to each other, others just quietly observing. She could sense a change in the room, a subtle shift in attention. People were no longer just expecting a joke. They were listening, really listening. She hadn't meant for that to happen, and yet she couldn't deny the curiosity that sparked inside her. The music was becoming a bridge, a connection between her world and theirs, and it was happening naturally without any effort. She tried to laugh at herself, thinking about how ridiculous this must look. Here she was, in a room of influential people, playing piano without a plan, yet feeling oddly confident. There was a strange thrill in the unpredictability of it, a joy that came from letting go of control. She glanced at the faces in the audience, noting the slight widening of eyes, the gentle leaning forward, the small smiles that suggested intrigue rather than mockery. She hadn't expected that. She had expected polite amusement, not genuine interest. The piano keys felt warmer now under her fingers, the notes resonating more clearly than she remembered. She experimented with small variations, pressing slightly harder here, softer there, letting the sound flow naturally. The room seemed to respond to her touch, the chatter quieting down as people began to focus. She realized she had become absorbed in the music, forgetting the joke entirely. Her playful intention had shifted into something more authentic, a genuine expression of the joy she felt in that moment. The laughter that had welcomed her was replaced by a soft, attentive silence, an invisible acknowledgement of her presence and her talent. For a brief moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. The environment, the people, the piano, everything felt heightened, alive in a way she hadn't experienced before. Her fingers moved almost on their own, and with each note, she felt a little more connected to the music, to herself, and to the audience. There was no fear now, only a sense of wonder. She realized that even though she had started this as a joke, she had stumbled into something unexpected, something far more meaningful than she had anticipated. Time seemed to stretch as she played, each note lingering in the air longer than it should, as if the room itself wanted to savor the sound. She felt the energy of the audience shift subtly, an unspoken recognition passing through the room. People were no longer just polite observers. They were witnesses to something rare, something beautiful that had not been planned or rehearsed. She caught glimpses of faces showing admiration, surprise, and even awe. The initial amusement had transformed into genuine appreciation, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Her confidence grew with each passing moment, and yet there was a delicate balance of humility in her playing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply letting the music flow naturally, guided by instinct and feeling. The joke she had intended seemed almost trivial now, replaced by the power of an unspoken connection. She noticed small details, the way a hand gently rested on the edge of a chair, the soft intake of breath from someone in the corner, the quiet nods of approval from a few who seemed completely captivated. Each subtle reaction reinforced the sense that something special was happening. She played longer than she expected, each note building on the last, creating patterns that felt spontaneous yet harmonious. She allowed herself to explore, to take risks with melodies and rhythms she had never tried before. The room responded with silence, yet the silence was alive, charged with attention and emotion. She could feel the weight of expectation lift, replaced by curiosity and genuine engagement. Even though she had approached this as a joke, the music had become a shared experience, a silent conversation between her and the audience. Eventually, she allowed a pause, letting the final note linger before releasing her hands from the keys. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat, and then small claps began to ripple through the audience. It wasn't overwhelming yet, but it was enough to show that people were noticing. She looked up, slightly surprised, seeing expressions that ranged from gentle admiration to astonishment. She had not expected this reaction. The joke had turned into something far more remarkable, something that had captured attention in a way she could never have imagined. She smiled, a mixture of embarrassment and joy, realizing how unpredictable life could be. One simple choice, one playful decision to entertain friends, had opened a door she didn't even know existed. She had started as someone who merely wanted to make people laugh, yet she had stumbled into a moment of genuine connection and wonder. The piano, once just a prop for her joke, had become a medium through which she expressed herself in a way words never could. And in that room, filled with people who were used to grandeur and performance, she had quietly shown them something authentic, something unexpected, something completely her own. After the first few notes had filled the room, the young woman began to feel a strange sense of calm. The nervousness that had gripped her at the start seemed to fade away with each movement of her fingers. She was no longer playing casually for a joke. There was something different in the way she touched the keys now, a subtle confidence that even she didn't fully recognize. Her fingers moved smoothly, almost as if guided by memory, and she found herself exploring melodies she hadn't thought about in years. The music began to have a rhythm, a flow that was natural and engaging. The audience, initially expecting something lighthearted and funny, started to shift in their attention. Eyes that had been casually watching now widened slightly. Whispers traveled quietly from one guest to another, though no one wanted to interrupt the moment. The room had grown softer in energy, the usual chatter replaced by a focused silence. There was an invisible thread connecting her to the listeners, and she could feel it, though she tried to ignore it, concentrating instead on the notes beneath her fingers. As she played, she experimented with small variations in the melody. Sometimes a note lingered longer, sometimes she added a gentle rise or fall in the sequence. She noticed that even the smallest changes caused subtle reactions in the audience. Someone's eyebrows raised slightly, a pair of eyes leaned in closer, a soft smile appeared on a face. She realized she had their attention not through deliberate skill, but through the genuine joy she put into her music. It was a delicate power, almost invisible yet deeply felt. There was a freedom in her playing she hadn't experienced before. In her usual life, she carefully measured her actions, considering the effect on others, but here she was untethered. The piano seemed to respond to her thoughts, creating melodies that felt like they came from somewhere deeper than conscious effort. She remembered playing alone as a child, letting the music flow without thinking about judgment or expectation. That childlike freedom had returned, but now it was amplified by the presence of people who were quietly captivated by her sound. The young woman's smile grew subtly as she noticed small changes in the audience's posture. The polite amusement they had at the start had transformed into something more. Heads were slightly tilted, hands rested gently on laps, and whispers had completely disappeared. It was as if the room had drawn a collective breath, holding it in awe of the unexpected performance. Even she was surprised at how naturally the music had shifted from playful to meaningful, how the joke had evolved into something much richer. She tried a gentle improvisation, letting her emotions guide the tempo and intensity. The sound seemed to wrap around the room, filling spaces between conversations, quiet corners, and even the faint echoes near the walls. There was a rhythm now, subtle and captivating, that drew everyone's attention deeper into the moment. She could sense the change in energy. The audience was no longer just observers, but participants in a shared experience, reacting in small, almost invisible ways that confirmed their engagement. Her confidence grew, but it was a quiet, understated confidence. She wasn't showing off. She was simply exploring the possibilities of the music in front of her. Each note carried a thought, a small feeling, a tiny piece of expression that added to the growing impression she was creating. She noticed that she could make the room listen, make them pause from their own conversations and concerns, simply with the sincerity of her playing. It was a strange power, one that required no words, no gestures, only the authenticity of her music. She allowed herself to explore a slightly faster tempo, letting her fingers dance across the keys with precision and lightness. The room responded subtly, a soft leaning forward from someone in the front, a small nod from a guest who had been staring in quiet disbelief. She felt encouraged, yet she did not force herself to perform. Everything remained natural. Every change she made to the melody was instinctive, not rehearsed. The audience could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why it was different from any performance they had expected. Occasionally, she glanced at the audience, noting reactions that were fleeting but telling. There was surprise in a pair of eyes, admiration in another, and the faint glimmer of awe on several faces. The music had become more than sound. It was a conversation, silent yet expressive, between her and everyone present. She realized that her playful intent, the initial joke, had given way to authenticity. The experience had become something bigger than herself, something that touched people quietly but deeply. With each passing minute, the room grew quieter in a unique way. It was not the silence of boredom or discomfort, but the silence of fascination. Even those who had been chatting earlier were now listening, their focus entirely on the piano and the young woman who had dared to play as a joke. There was an invisible respect forming, a recognition that this moment was special, unplanned yet significant. She had never experienced anything like it, and though she tried to stay in the background of her own thoughts, the realization began to settle in that she was capable of creating something extraordinary without intending to. She moved into a slightly more complex sequence, the notes flowing with a soft intensity. Her fingers tapped, pressed, and glided across the keys in patterns that felt alive, spontaneous, and yet perfectly aligned. She wasn't thinking in terms of technique. She was thinking in terms of feeling. The music carried her emotions naturally, and in doing so, it carried the audience with it. She saw people leaning in, whispering quietly to each other, exchanging glances of disbelief, yet the atmosphere remained calm, intimate, and fully attentive. There was a rare and delicate beauty in that mutual focus. Even as she continued, she maintained a sense of humility. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply letting the music happen. There was joy in that freedom, a joy she could feel in her chest, spreading outward with every chord. The guests could sense it, and their reactions, though restrained, reflected that they were sharing in her experience. A few heads swiveled slightly, a hand rested gently on a friend's arm. A quiet smile passed from one person to another. The young woman realized that these small, subtle gestures were the truest measure of her impact so far. She experimented with dynamics, softly increasing the volume in some passages and gently easing it in others. The room seemed to breathe along with the music, a subtle rhythm she had never noticed before. Her ears tuned into the faintest shifts in attention, the softest intake of breath, the smallest movements that reflected engagement and emotion. The piano had become her voice, and the audience was listening not to words, but to emotion, subtlety, and sincerity. It was a conversation that transcended language, one she hadn't planned, yet one that felt necessary and right. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, yet she remained fully immersed, losing all sense of time. The initial joke had long faded into the background, replaced by the real moment unfolding. She felt the weight of responsibility to continue, yet paradoxically, she felt free, liberated by the absence of expectation. Every note, every pause, every gentle rise and fall was instinctive, and the audience responded in kind. There was no applause yet, no acknowledgement, just a quiet and profound appreciation that filled the room. She allowed a small pause, just a breath between notes, letting the music linger in the air. The effect was immediate. The listeners leaned slightly forward, attentive, as if waiting for the next sound. She smiled to herself, realizing that this playful experiment had taken on a life of its own. She had begun the performance with a joke, yet the reality had transformed into something far greater. The music, her instinct, and the room's attention had merged, creating a moment that was delicate, rare, and unforgettable. In that space, she discovered a new sense of possibility. She had always seen herself as ordinary, someone who played for fun, never for recognition. Yet here, with the audience captivated and the piano responding to her touch, she glimpsed what was possible when fear and expectation were set aside. She felt a deep connection, not just to the instrument, but to the people around her, each one silently participating in a shared experience of wonder. The transformation of a simple joke into something meaningful filled her with an exhilaration she hadn't expected. The audience remained quietly attentive, each person caught in their own reflection of the music and the performer. She noticed the subtle differences in engagement, the way some leaned in slightly, how others tilted their heads, or gently tapped fingers against a glass. These small gestures were invisible to anyone not paying close attention, yet they spoke volumes about the effect of her music. She realized that the impact of her performance was not in grand gestures or dramatic flourishes, but in the authenticity and simplicity of her expression. The piano, her hands, and the room had become a single entity, and she was at the center of that harmony. As the part of the melody she had been exploring drew to a natural conclusion, she allowed herself to pause briefly and take a breath. The silence was filled not with emptiness, but with anticipation. She felt a thrill run through her, the realization that the playful moment she had started with had now become a delicate, unspoken dialogue with the room. She glanced at the audience, seeing their subtle acknowledgement, the soft nods and the gentle smiles that confirmed her intuition. She had surprised herself, and it was clear she had also surprised them. As the young woman continued playing, she felt an unexpected surge of confidence. The playful start had transformed into a performance of genuine depth. She had no idea she could feel so connected to the music, or that the music could connect so deeply with the people around her. Each note carried intention, even if she had not planned it, and the room seemed to hold its breath in response. The subtle changes in melody, the quiet improvisations, all wove together to form something larger than the sum of its parts. She began to notice more clearly the faces in the audience. Eyes widened in surprise, eyebrows raised in astonishment. There was curiosity, admiration, even awe, all visible in the subtle expressions. The young woman realized that she was no longer playing a joke. She was captivating a room of people who were used to being impressed by polished, rehearsed performances. What she offered was different. It was raw, authentic, and unexpected. Encouraged by the subtle reactions, she allowed herself to experiment further. Her fingers moved faster now, exploring complex patterns and harmonies she had only attempted in private moments. The piano seemed to respond with a richer tone, the notes resonating more fully than before. She could hear the faintest gasps from someone at the back, the gentle shifting of people in their seats, all signs that the music had completely drawn them in. Even the most skeptical faces in the room could not hide the awe beginning to show. Her mind was calm yet alert. She was fully present, focused on the music but aware of its effect. Every chord, every touch of the key, carried emotion, and she could sense how it traveled across the room. The elite audience, accustomed to witnessing talent, was now caught off guard by the depth of feeling in what they had initially assumed would be a humorous, light-hearted performance. She smiled inwardly, realizing that something remarkable was happening without a single word spoken. The young woman began to blend different melodies she had known and some she created on the spot. The sounds intertwined, creating a harmony that felt alive. The audience reacted subtly but unmistakably. Heads leaned closer, eyes followed her fingers, and a few people tilted their heads as if listening more deeply. Even without applause, she could feel the tension and excitement in the air. It was a silent recognition of skill and creativity, a wordless communication that was more profound than any conversation. She allowed her emotions to guide the tempo. There were moments of gentle softness, almost whispering through the notes, and moments of intensity, where the sound filled the room with richness. The music carried stories, feelings, and nuances that words could never capture. The audience was swept along, completely immersed. The young woman had not intended this. She was simply letting her instincts lead her, yet the effect was undeniable. The joke had vanished, replaced by something genuinely inspiring. Occasionally, she caught herself glancing at the audience. Reactions were subtle but unmistakable. A hand rested lightly on a friend's arm. A person's eyes widened slightly. Another's mouth opened in quiet surprise. These small signals reinforced her sense of connection. She had discovered that playing with sincerity could touch people in a way performance alone could not. Each note was more than sound. It was a bridge between her and the listeners, a shared moment of discovery and wonder. She experimented further with dynamics, changing volumes, adding soft pauses and gentle accelerations. The audience leaned in, attentive to the shifts. She felt their engagement like a current running through the room, and it filled her with energy and joy. The music was no longer just her own. It had become a shared experience, each note amplified by the response of those listening. She realized how rare it was to witness such an effect, and it made her playing feel more meaningful than she ever imagined. The young woman began to explore improvisation more boldly, weaving in unexpected turns, slight dissonances that resolved beautifully, and soft flourishes that caught the ear. She felt liberated, no longer confined by expectations, trusting her instincts completely. The music became a language without words, a story told through touch and sound, and the audience responded intuitively. She could sense the room hanging on each phrase, experiencing the emotions she infused into the melody. Her attention shifted to the finer details of her playing. She noticed the subtle differences in tone, the way the resonance changed when she pressed lightly versus firmly. She adjusted with care, enhancing the beauty of the notes without overthinking. The elite guests were captivated, watching as her hands moved with precision and grace. Their polite demeanor gave way to visible admiration, and she felt the quiet pride of someone realizing the impact of her talent, even though it had begun as a joke. Time seemed to flow differently. Minutes stretched, yet she remained in a focused state, fully immersed in the music. She noticed that no one was looking away. Their eyes followed every movement, their expressions attentive, their minds absorbed. She had turned a casual, playful act into an experience that commanded attention without force. It was a natural transformation, the kind that occurs when authenticity meets skill in a moment of openness and vulnerability. The young woman felt a growing sense of satisfaction. The energy in the room, the subtle gestures of the audience, and the way the piano seemed to respond to her touch all contributed to a profound sense of accomplishment. She had started this performance with no expectation beyond humor, yet she had created a space where people were moved, intrigued, and inspired. She allowed herself a brief smile, acknowledging the unspoken impact she had made. She tried variations in rhythm, letting her fingers dance across the keys, sometimes lightly, sometimes with emphasis. The music felt alive, responding to the nuances of her mood and the subtle cues from the room. The audience, sensing the authenticity of her performance, became part of the moment. Their reactions were quiet but telling, a soft acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding. Even those who initially expected a lighthearted joke could not deny the depth of skill and emotion they were witnessing. Every note she played carried intention, and she realized how much power lay in subtlety. She did not need dramatic gestures or flashy movements. The sincerity of her playing spoke volumes. The room, filled with the elite accustomed to spectacle, was now absorbed in the quiet brilliance of a spontaneous performance. She felt a sense of pride, not from recognition, but from the realization that she had touched people in a meaningful, unplanned way. As she continued, the young woman explored contrasts in the music, blending soft passages with more dynamic sections, alternating between gentle and bold touches. The audience was mesmerized, leaning slightly forward, their attention unwavering. She saw small smiles, subtle nods, and attentive eyes reflecting the surprise and admiration they felt. She realized she was no longer playing for herself alone. The room had become part of her expression, and their response gave her energy and focus. She allowed herself to improvise freely, experimenting with notes, rhythms, and harmonies that she had never played publicly. Her creativity seemed to expand with the room's attention, and the music felt like a conversation unfolding in real time. Every chord resonated, not just in the room, but in the hearts of those listening. She understood, in a quiet but powerful way, that the unplanned nature of her performance was precisely what made it so compelling. The young woman felt a deep connection to the moment, to the piano, and to the audience. The initial joke had vanished entirely, replaced by a rich, authentic expression that surprised even her. She was no longer thinking about entertaining. She was sharing something personal, a reflection of her inner world through the language of music. The audience's silent admiration, the subtle gestures, the quiet awe, all confirmed the impact of her authenticity and talent. She played on, weaving together melodies with subtle complexity, allowing the music to flow naturally. Every note, every pause, every gentle accent contributed to the growing intensity of the room's engagement. The elite guests were completely absorbed, captivated by the unexpected depth and beauty of her playing. The young woman realized that she had not only surprised them, but herself as well. The playful beginning had evolved into an unforgettable experience, a moment that would remain vivid in the memory of everyone present. As she reached the end of this section of the music, she allowed a gentle pause, letting the last note linger in the air. The room held its breath, a soft silence that spoke of anticipation and wonder. The young woman felt a quiet triumph, an understanding that she had created something rare. What had started as a lighthearted joke had grown into a performance that combined skill, emotion, and authenticity in a way that captivated even the most discerning audience. She had discovered not only her hidden talent, but also the power of genuine expression to touch hearts without a single word spoken. The young woman's fingers moved over the keys with a new sense of purpose. Each note carried weight. Each chord expressed something deep and unspoken. She was no longer playing casually or jokingly. The performance had grown into a revelation, both for her and for those watching. The audience, initially expecting light amusement, was now completely immersed, drawn into the music in a way that felt almost magical. The room was still, every person holding their attention, listening to the delicate rise and fall of the melody. Her hands glided effortlessly, the notes flowing seamlessly from one to another. She had started to mix subtle improvisations into the original tune, adding layers of harmony and emotion that made the music feel alive. She could feel the reactions around her. Small shifts in posture, quiet gasps, and eyes widening in awe. The elite crowd was mesmerized, completely unprepared for the depth of skill and feeling emerging from a performance that had begun as a mere joke. She could sense that something extraordinary was happening, though she allowed herself only the smallest of smiles, keeping her focus on the music. The music grew more complex with subtle variations in rhythm and tone. She felt a powerful connection to the piano, as if it had become an extension of her own body. Her mind was calm but alive with ideas, instinctively knowing how to enhance the sound without thinking too hard. The audience could sense the authenticity in her playing, responding intuitively to the rise and fall of the melody. The energy in the room shifted subtly, becoming quiet yet charged, as if every person was holding their breath in anticipation. The atmosphere was electric, though no one made a sound. The spell of the music was absolute. She began to explore the emotional depth of the piece, moving from soft, gentle passages to moments of intense, powerful expression. Each note carried meaning, a story told through sound rather than words. The audience leaned in slightly, their faces reflecting surprise, admiration, and awe. Even those accustomed to watching polished performers seemed unprepared for the raw, authentic energy of this music. She realized that the playful beginning had been a doorway to something much more profound, something that had captivated everyone present. The young woman noticed the subtle reactions of the audience. A hand resting lightly on a friend's arm, an impressed whisper, a slight nod of acknowledgement. She felt these gestures as a kind of invisible applause, proof that the music was connecting in a way that was rare and special. She had not expected this outcome, and yet the realization filled her with quiet joy. She was no longer just playing. She was communicating, creating a shared experience that transcended words. Her fingers moved faster, dancing across the keys with precision and grace. The music flowed like a river, continuous and mesmerizing, drawing the listeners deeper into the performance. She experimented with gentle pauses and soft accents, letting the audience feel the emotion behind each note. The room remained silent, yet the intensity of attention was palpable. She could sense the collective admiration and disbelief, a quiet acknowledgement of the talent they had witnessed without expecting it. The initial joke had long disappeared. What remained was the power of genuine expression. She allowed herself to take risks, exploring intricate melodies and unexpected harmonies. The piano responded with a richness she had never experienced before, each chord resonating with clarity and emotion. The audience was visibly captivated, their eyes following her movements, their bodies leaning subtly forward, completely absorbed. She felt an exhilaration that came from creating something new in the moment, unplanned yet profound. It was as though she and the room were part of a single living entity, breathing together through the music. The young woman began to weave different musical themes together, blending soft and loud passages, gentle notes with more forceful ones. The music became a story, with highs and lows, tension and release, guiding the listeners through an emotional journey. She felt the audience's attention tighten, their focus absolute. Every subtle shift, every carefully placed pause drew them further in. The connection was so strong that she could almost hear their admiration in the silence, feel it in the energy surrounding her. She glanced briefly at the audience, catching expressions that told her more than words could. Eyes wide in wonder, a gentle smile here and there, a quiet nod or a faint intake of breath. These small details made her realize how much impact her music was having. She had started playing for amusement, but she had unwittingly created a moment that would be remembered, a moment of pure, shared emotion. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating, filling her with a sense of purpose and pride. Her improvisation grew bolder, yet she remained in control, shaping the music with care and attention. Each phrase carried nuance and subtle emotion, and the audience hung on every note. She could feel the shift in energy, the room responding as a living entity, acknowledging her talent and sincerity. There was a stillness in the air, a reverence that made every sound more powerful. Even the most composed guests were visibly moved, their polished exterior giving way to quiet admiration. The young woman allowed the music to soar, creating moments of intensity that contrasted with the gentle passages. The rise and fall of the melody mirrored the emotions she felt, and the audience followed every movement. Some leaned in closer, others closed their eyes briefly to immerse themselves in the sound. She could sense the wonder spreading across the room, the unexpected impact of a performance that began as a playful joke. She felt connected to everyone present, the music serving as a bridge between her emotions and theirs. Time seemed to stretch and warp as she played, each note lingering longer in the air, each chord resonating with the room's energy. She had entered a state where the music flowed naturally, unrestrained by expectation or thought. The audience remained enraptured, their focus absolute. There were no interruptions, no distractions, only the quiet recognition of something extraordinary unfolding before them. She realized that her playful beginning had transformed into a moment of awe and inspiration, a rare and precious experience that neither she nor the audience would forget. She began to bring the piece toward a natural conclusion, slowing the tempo slightly, allowing the final notes to breathe. The music became softer, more reflective, a gentle conclusion to the emotional journey she had created. The audience was silent, hanging on every sound, completely absorbed. The room seemed to exhale as she reached the last note, letting it linger in the air before releasing it. There was a heartbeat of quiet, a pause that felt infinite in its intensity, as if the world had stopped to acknowledge what had just occurred. When the silence finally broke, it was with a gentle ripple of astonishment. Eyes opened wider, subtle gasps were exchanged, and a few small claps began to spread across the room. The young woman felt a mixture of relief and wonder, realizing the full impact of her performance. She had turned a simple, playful idea into a profound, unforgettable moment. The audience, elite and experienced, had been genuinely moved, and the realization filled her with quiet satisfaction. She had discovered not only her hidden talent, but also the power of authenticity, connection, and the unexpected beauty that can emerge from a single choice. The young woman slowly lifted her hands from the keys, feeling the last vibrations of the music fade into the air. The room was still for a heartbeat longer, as if everyone had collectively held their breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then, softly at first, applause began to ripple through the space. It was polite, reserved, yet filled with genuine admiration. As more hands joined in, the sound grew, a mixture of surprise and respect that made her chest swell with an emotion she could hardly name. She had not expected this. She had never imagined that a casual joke would turn into something so powerful, something so memorable. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, feeling a warmth spread through her body. The audience, elite as they were, looked at her with a new understanding. Their eyes no longer held polite curiosity. They held admiration, awe, and even a touch of wonder. Some whispered to their neighbors, exchanging quiet words of astonishment, while others simply watched, captivated and silent. The room had shifted, transformed by the music and the authenticity she had brought to it. The young woman realized that the joke had served as a doorway, opening a path to something far greater than she had ever intended. As the applause continued, a few people approached her, their expressions sincere. They offered words of praise, comments on the unexpected depth of her talent, and questions about whether she had studied music professionally. She shook her head, smiling softly, explaining that she had played casually before, but never with an audience like this. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to amazement. She noticed that the atmosphere had changed entirely. The casual social chatter had been replaced by a genuine interest in her and her abilities. It was a humbling, surreal experience. The young woman took a moment to breathe, letting the emotions settle. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, some still lingering, others stepping back with quiet smiles. She realized how rare it was to witness such a response, especially from people accustomed to perfection and spectacle. The impact of her performance was not in the grandeur of her technique alone, but in the sincerity, emotion, and authenticity that had guided every note. It was a quiet power, subtle yet undeniable, and she could feel it radiating from the room. A few people approached with questions about where she had learned to play, if she had ever performed in public, and whether she would consider doing so in the future. She responded with humility, explaining that music had always been a private joy, something she played for herself and a few close friends. They listened intently, nodding and occasionally exchanging glances that conveyed amazement. The young woman realized that what had started as a playful act had become a bridge between her world and theirs, a moment of connection that transcended social status, expectation, and planning. Some of the guests, moved by the authenticity of her performance, suggested opportunities, invitations to other gatherings, and even a few private requests to hear her play again. She listened politely, considering each one with a mixture of surprise and quiet pride. She had never sought recognition or validation, yet it was clear that her music had touched people in a way she had not anticipated. The realization that something so spontaneous and lighthearted could have such profound impact left her both humbled and exhilarated. As she stepped away from the piano, she noticed the lingering energy in the room. People were still talking quietly about her performance, their voices filled with admiration rather than casual chatter. The young woman felt a shift within herself as well. She had discovered something about her own abilities, a hidden depth that she had not recognized before. What began as a playful gesture had revealed a talent she had underestimated, a confidence she had not fully acknowledged. The experience left her with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. She walked through the crowd, exchanging smiles and quiet words of thanks. Every interaction reinforced the sense that she had created a meaningful, shared experience. The people around her, elite as they were, had been moved not by showmanship, but by authenticity. That realization settled deeply within her, a reminder that true impact often comes from sincerity and connection, rather than performance or expectation. It was a lesson she would carry with her long after the evening ended. Later, she found a quiet moment to reflect, sitting alone with her thoughts while the room continued its subdued activity. She considered the journey of the evening, the playful suggestion to play, the hesitant steps toward the piano, the casual beginning, and the unexpected depth that had emerged. She realized how unpredictable life could be, how small decisions could open doors to experiences far beyond imagination. The music had been her language, her way of expressing something she had never fully understood, and in doing so, she had touched others in a meaningful way. She thought about the people she had just shared this moment with, the subtle reactions, the expressions of awe, the quiet conversations that followed. Even though she had not intended to impress, to perform seriously, or to seek attention, she had created something lasting. The experience reinforced a simple truth. Authenticity, even when unexpected or unplanned, has the power to move hearts and minds. The applause, the whispers, the awe, all of it was a testament to the invisible force of genuine expression. The young woman smiled softly, realizing that this evening would be remembered not just by her, but by those who had witnessed it. The playful act, the casual start, had evolved into something extraordinary. It was a reminder that talent can shine in the most unexpected moments, that courage can emerge from the willingness to take risks, and that true impact often arises from being fully present and sincere. She felt grateful for the chance to discover her own depth and to share it, even unknowingly, with others who were capable of seeing it. As the evening drew to a close, she packed her belongings slowly, savoring the final moments. The piano, once just a prop for a joke, had become a vessel for connection, emotion, and revelation. She knew she would remember the sensation of the keys beneath her fingers, the way the music had flowed naturally, and the subtle, powerful responses of the audience. It was a memory of growth, discovery, and unexpected triumph, a story she could carry with her always. Walking away from the event, she felt a quiet sense of pride. Not the pride of boasting or seeking validation, but the deep satisfaction of having shared something authentic, having revealed a hidden talent, and having connected with others in a meaningful way. The experience had changed her understanding of herself, her abilities, and the power of unplanned, sincere action. She had begun with a joke, yet ended with a profound experience that would echo in her life and in the memories of those who had witnessed it. She realized that life often presents moments that are unexpected, and that true beauty often emerges from spontaneity and honesty. The laughter, the casual beginning, the playful intent, all had led to a moment of genuine recognition and admiration. She understood now that the impact of her actions, even small and unassuming ones, could ripple far beyond her expectations. It was a lesson she would remember, a story to cherish, and a confirmation of the extraordinary potential hidden within ordinary moments. In the quiet of her reflection, she thought about the piano, the room, and the people who had been part of that night. Each element had contributed to the unexpected magic of the evening. She had discovered not only her talent, but the joy of connection, the power of authenticity, and the surprise of seeing a joke transform into something profoundly moving. It was a memory of wonder, humility, and exhilaration, a testament to the power of embracing the unexpected. She walked away with a heart full of gratitude and a renewed sense of the possibilities that life could hold, knowing that sometimes, the smallest and most playful acts can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes.